much. Okay, thank you ever so much, everyone, and welcome to the Building Regulations Q&A Managing Competence. We're going to be jumping straight into the questions. So the first question is from Charles. Charles asks, do you make a clear distinction between competence and compliance? As PDBR, we are issuing a questionnaire to designers, but recognise that it's our form and needs refinement.
The law requires skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, and therefore organisational capability. And the purpose of the PAS standard was to indicate what that looks like, and all we've done is overlaid over the top of that a process that describes how you might go about working that process. I say we have worked constantly with the BSR. They haven't gone as far as endorsing the guidance, which was just interesting in the conversation yesterday. He said that's all we can do at the minute, but the fact that they are now signposting it would be a clear indication that the process we describe is the sort of thing that they're expecting to happen. And having had one-to-one conversations with them, they say, I said, well, it's a fairly simple principle, and he said, yeah, and that's just about how it is. It's implementation's a nightmare, isn't it, Andrew?
Agree. Yeah.
Next question, Andrew asks, has anyone created a register for PCBRs to demonstrate competence, similar to the APS and REBA for PDBRs?
I hear things. I'm going to the CIC conference. It's Thursday, Friday this week, and I will get to hear a little bit more. I've heard rumours that there are a couple of organisations doing it. I've seen nothing.
I'm the same. I've heard things in the grapevine, but nothing has been confirmed as yet.
The grapevine. Simon says, where do you stand on grandfather rights as competent? The lift industry widely acknowledge grandfather rights for subcontractors.
It's really interesting. I was involved in a lift accident where a lift motor got dropped. When we did the investigation, we found the entire lift industry. Not one of them had been trained in Lola, not one of them. And it was standard practice, and that's just had developed from grandfather rights. They then went away as an industry and did something about it. It's not perhaps as robust as I would expect. And that was a few years back. And I think that's the risk. And when you talk to people in the lift industry, they say, if the person who apprenticed you was rubbish, it's likely you may well be rubbish too. And they are all acutely aware of that process.
Philip says, accustomed to basing the evidence of competence on the format suggested by PAS 9.1, now withdrawn, I was expecting the government's CAS Common Assessment Standard to be updated to suit the BSA. Where does your work sit in relation to CAS? And he says, thank you.
It covers a different range of competencies. Common Assessment Standard is basically organisational health and safety across the board. Whereas what we're looking at in 8671, for example, for a PD, is individual competency in a specific area.
An organisational capability is looking at the management of competencies. It was an interesting conversation with the regulator a while back, saying that they had initially had this idea that you would apply something similar to PAS, the standard against this, and then they realised it just didn't work that way. It's asking for something. It's asking for something different. Arguably, that needs to be brought up in line with this now. We're now. I think it'll go back the other way now when everybody realises that asking for somebody's policy and a few training records and some other stuff is probably not evidencing competence or organisational capability.
I agree that we have are lean and will continue to lean heavily on evidence-based competence assessment. So there's less of an emphasis on qualifications, attending training and CPD, much more on evidence of doing across the roles that we're looking at.
Thank you ever so much. A question from Pavita. A typical project may have joint ventures or multiple organisations. Can a project or programme use the process and create a coordinated document? There might still be gaps in organisational capability management mitigated by a subcontractor.
I talked yesterday to a very large organisation who's one of the major people as an APS member, and they are talking about taking the standard now and applying it on behalf of their clients to projects, so that it will apply to a project as it will to an organisation. It's the same process that needs to follow, and arguably, if organisations are if we get to a point, which we will hopefully at the end of the year, where we can accredit people, then it makes projects it's easier because everybody has a badge, and that's really where we want to go to. So that, as with SSIP in the past, you need one badge rather than every time you go you need to show that evidence of compliance. It's interesting. We had a conversation with Common Assessment Standard, and there's a recognition that what we're doing is sort of complementary to what they're doing. They're doing some basic checks of pre-qualification questionnaire, but if people are doing what we're suggesting, they should be able to answer their questionnaire, and that's sort of how it's, I think, going to move forward.
Thank you so much. Callum asks, a principal contractor is asking us to provide the PDBR as part of our appointed as CDM PD advisor role to them. This is a misunderstanding between the two separate PD roles, CDM and BR. There is an expectation that we should be providing this as part of the CDM PD advisor role. This is incorrect and requires a separate appointment, but does demonstrate the confusion between the two principal designer roles. Notwithstanding the competence issues for PDBR, will the role of PDBR advisor work for the PC where they are appointed as PDBR by the client? That was a paragraph, Callum. A sentence.
It's a long question. Don't move it from the screen at the moment, Tom.
It will stay on the screen. That's a long question.
Well,
thank you, Callum.
There is confusion in the industry created by the use of similar terminology. But I think the diagram that Mark drew up, or thought about at 5 o'clock this morning and drew up before we hit the ground running at 9 o'clock, describes the situation that we think exists, which is that the PDBR will be a specialist consultant. But can the two appointments be made? Well, yes, I think they can. I can't remember the exact regulation number. I'm sure it says in Part 2A that the clients can appoint the PDBR if they believe their PD-CDM is competent.
As long as they have the organisational capability, which is what loops back to what we're talking about today, really, is can you demonstrate the organisation to deliver?
So I think between us and what was said in this webinar, I mean, there is confusion out in the industry, but the regulations are clear. It is a possibility to make a joint appointment. There isn't currently a joint appointment document. APS haven't done one, and RIBA haven't yet produced theirs. But I think it's a case of watch that space. But I hope that has answered Callum's question.
Thank you, Callum. And now Pavita with a sentence question. Will the client specify the organisational competency and the scope of the project?
One would hope so. But there's so many different types of clients, sizes of client, clients with no experience, clients with lots of experience, that a one-size-fits-all answer just isn't going to work. You would expect the more experienced clients to be able to understand what organisational capability is all about, understand what the regulations are saying, and make sure that their consultants, as part of their duties under Part 2A, make sure that their consultants can demonstrate adequately to the client that they are competent.
The whole point of putting the standard out there is to try to get a common understanding in the industry as soon as we can. Put a marker in the standard and say this is not commercial. This is, for the greater good. To get something out there so everybody can get together and then if we try it all out, we feed back. It gets passed into British standard, and at that point, everybody goes, "This is what good looks like." We can all then get on and deliver against that, and then can deliver competence, which is what Hackett challenged us to do after Grenfell.
Thank you ever so much. Just a reminder to everyone, because someone has just signed up for today's webinar, you can watch back the main webinar through your ticket link, and the Q&A will be going up on YouTube separately. This is just because the Q&A tends to overrun, and we've got a few more questions to get through. John asks, so if a design consultancy has someone as a CDM/safety advisor, and he leaves the consultancy, is instantly not competent. They have multiple architects, but not specialists.
Well, this is quite a common situation that arises. At APS, we organise business competence as one of our membership arrangements. If an organisation loses, for example, their individual who is identified as being capable of providing that organisation with PDBR capability, if they lose that person, then that organisation is not behaving well if it continues to accept appointments that cover the PDBR role. I think that's fairly self-evident. The regulations actually say if you don't have the skills to do the job, you shouldn't accept it. And so that's where I would respond to that particular question. It doesn't matter how many people you have in your organisation, you're supposed to have a mix of skills to match the sort of projects you work on.
Thank you, Andrew. Pavitra asks, can you confirm the repercussions for not fulfilling the competency requirements, both from BSR and CDM perspective? Is there a commercial or regulation? Are there commercial or regulation implications?
This is criminal law. In extremis, unlimited fine, 2 years in prison. In extremis, but we are talking about criminal legislation, criminal prosecution, and with personal and potentially personal liability.
Yeah. Thank you. Charles asks, are we in danger of getting overcomplicated, bearing in mind that projects go on, they don't wait for our competency matrices?
It's the law. We've sat down and went, how can we explain this in the most simple way we can? This is what we think we've got to. This is what the experts around the table with the BSR's oversight thought that as simple as possible looks like. Now it will develop. I suspect it will develop more complexity rather than more simplicity. But at some point, the industry needs to change. However, it is accepted that this is minimum 5-year project and more like a 30-year project. So we're going to be 5 years before the tier ones get up to speed so that everybody they engage, they can evidence their competence. I think that's talking to people what we're talking about. But before, my neighbour, who I quote so often, and I talk with him at the weekend, funnily enough, so that I quote him all the time, he is a brilliant local builder. But could he demonstrate skills, knowledge, and experience and behaviours? No. Building regulations, he relies on his local architect who supports him all the way through that. But if you ask for his qualifications, he just couldn't do it. And that's where we're talking 30 years, a qualified workforce across the industry.
Wow.
Well, can I just jump in there? Mark, when you were going through the diagrams about organisational capability, and then to answer the previous question, the overall matrix is fairly complex. But Mark said, and I'm now repeating, that what you do is you match the requirements that are set out in these tables with your organization's requirements, and therefore you don't need to do everything in it. You need to decide what your business needs, choose those things, and deal with them accordingly. So very small organizations will have a completely different approach to very large organizations in the use of the organizational capability management system.
Thank you ever so much. A few people have asked, do we send the slides out after the events? For the Building Regulation series, we will be sending the slides out post-event. So just as a reminder to everyone. Callum with another question, which is great. Thank you so much, Callum. A question being asked of me at present. Do we require to complete any training to carry out the role of PDBR? If we can demonstrate the appropriate skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, will this suffice without taking on the competence training?
Well, we've been asked that question many times. And it's usually, can I upskill from PD CDM to PDBR? The answer generally is no. This is these skills are acquired through time and through doing things. So there's no instant jump through a training course to be able to deal with building regulations, all of them, all other relevant regulations, and the building control process. However, you can obtain knowledge and understanding of building regulations by attending courses delivered by, for example, LABC, who do a half-day course specifically for designers, and organisations like CABE do full 3-day sessions on how to be a building control inspector. So that sort of course is out there, but there is no effective way of instantly becoming a PDBR through training.
I think that there's also another element to it, that if you've always done this, you've always worked in making building control applications, you need to upskill to understand the new requirements of the building regulations part 2A. If you work in HRBs, you need to understand that. I think APS do another a full day course that covers all of the changes that are. So there's this different bits of upskilling, but you can't, I don't think, go and do a course to become a PDBR if you've never done building control applications, and that's not the world you work in. It's not that sort of role.
Thank you, gents. Right, we're going to go to the last couple of questions. Julie asks, as a PC, how do we assess our contractors? This is more PC management of their own org.
So I'm not seeing that question, Tommy. Has that just come in?
It's the top one, 1237, Julie Ford.
Oh yeah,
I think it's the same process. It's asking contractors to demonstrate organisational capability, and if they say, what does that look like, you can point them in the direction of the standard and say, well, this is what it looks like. And they then need to demonstrate that the people they have are competent. Whether you speaking to a Kia regional compliance manager a couple of months ago, he said, we've got this process in place, but the trouble is you send it out and people go, what? And it's really difficult unless you started to manage competence and you've got processes in place to manage competence and you've got role competence statements. It's really difficult, because if it's a process that needs to be put in place to allow you then to demonstrate.
Thank you so much, Jen. John asks, how aligned are APS and REBA with all the changes?
Well, I'm familiar with the REBA register scheme, if this is what the question's about. REBA have a desire to combine, for their members, to combine PD roles under CDM and building regulations. They have set out courses to do that and to assist their members to do that. There's a book published that covers that ground. APS some time ago decided that it wasn't appropriate to combine two sets of regulations in that way, and so we are not aligned with the RIBA way of thinking, but we are aligned with the objective of achieving far more competent industry, designers, contractors, etc., throughout the industry, and that's our objective. So we share the same objective, long-term objective, but we're approaching it in a different way.
And on the organisational capability piece, they were a member of the work group and were part of the development of the process.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Okay, final two questions. Callum asks, regarding his first question, can the same organisation / individual carry out both roles of CDM PD and PDBR? Could this be a conflict of interest?
No, the BSR want one organisation delivering both roles where they have the competence to do so. That's their policy objective, but not a legal requirement, I would say.
Thank you ever so much. Just noticed that Terry said thank you both, and there are three of us. So I guess that's aimed at Mark, and me and Andrew should share the glory. Timothy asks, great to see the accredited training on evidencing organisational capability coming forth. When can we expect similar accredited training on the day-to-day of doing this? For example, design review trackers, design records, etc., i.e., what does good practice looks like? He says, thank you very much, Tim.
As fast as Andrew and I can get our heads together, I think would be the fair thing to say.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for those ideas, Timothy. We'll take them on board.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. I think we're going to end there if that's okay with everyone.